Why have borders? This question is asked at an alarming rate in modern society by young people. It is indicative of how naive many of them are. They often have no idea how much violence occurs, and at what magnitude outside U.S. borders. In many countries, terrorist or criminal organizations strip families naked, decapitate them, and hang them from bridges by their ankles for perceived infractions committed against criminal or terrorist organizations. They do so with impunity. In North Carolina, there were 2 local cartel members who had lost a large shipment of drugs for the cartel and were videotaped being chainsawed in half while kneeling in a local meat processing facility. In the cartel's home country, local law enforcement often knows exactly who committed these atrocities, but will not dare make an arrest. Police officers who refuse cartel bribes and try to protect their communities know they will be made an example of, often by being hung from the very bridges where victims are displayed. These foreign adversaries want to bring that reality to the United States. The innocent people who have fled their countries to escape such horrors certainly do not want it brought here. Otherwise, why would they have left in the first place? There must be a vetting process. There clearly was not a worthwhile vetting process in place if for 4 years an estimated 2,000 suspected terrorists made it across the border, along with 1.5 million other migrant gotaways. Personal experience in Iraq, 2009 to 2010. When I was stationed in Iraq in 2009 to 2010, we were preparing for U.S. withdrawal. By that time, soldiers were largely confined to the international zone, IED, with only limited patrolling outside. While posted at an entry control point, a massive explosion struck without warning, shaking the structure I was in and knocking dust from the walls. The next day, I learned the explosion had been caused by a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, VBIED or car bomb, that detonated 10 miles from my location, yet I still felt it. It was targeting civilians at a local festival. There were no military targets nearby. On October 25, 2009 at ECP-1, 2 VBIEDs detonated just outside the checkpoint. One destroyed a bus full of children, injured over 700 people, and killed more than 150. Several soldiers suffered severe concussions, but remarkably, none were killed or permanently wounded. The claim that U.S. presence caused the violence is false. Terrorism and jihad are ways of life in the Middle East, and the violence continued long after our withdrawal. IED and car bomb attacks, 2011 to 2013. According to Action on Armed Violence, between 2011 and 2013, more than 53,000 civilians were killed or injured worldwide by IEDs. Over 80% of the victims were civilians. AOAV also noted that globally, car bomb incidents more than tripled during that time. Notable incidents: Iraq, July 5, 2011, Taji bombings, at least 35 killed, 50 injured. Feb 23, 2012, nationwide attacks, 83 killed, 250 plus wounded across 14 cities. May 15 to 21, 2013, series of attacks, 449 killed, 732 injured in 1 week. Sep 21, 2013, Baghdad funeral attacks, 115 killed, 255 injured. Jan 15, 2014, Baghdad car bombs, 40 killed, 88 injured. Jan 2, 2017, Sadr City bombings, 56 killed, 120 injured. And these counts exclude mass executions, honor killings, and daily sectarian violence. Humanitarian limitations after withdrawal. In 2010, while manning a security checkpoint, a family brought an elderly man with jaundice, begging for medical help. I requested authorization through my chain of command. A year earlier, we could have treated him, but by then financial aid and medical support had been cut off. The request was denied, not from a lack of compassion, but because word would have spread, and thousands more would have sought help we could no longer provide. The U.S. withdrawal was completed in December 2011, just as Iraq's infrastructure, police, and military were beginning to stabilize. Many of us knew leaving early would create a void, and in 2014, ISIS proved us right by seizing Mosul and Fallujah. Ramadi fell a year later, in May 2015, until American troops returned to help drive them out. The bigger picture. The media and Hollywood reduce everything to violence and drama, painting soldiers as kill, kill, kill. But there is always a larger mission, making the host nation secure, building infrastructure, and ultimately keeping our U.S. borders safe by securing theirs. At that time, there were 212 ways to be a soldier in the United States Army. Only a handful of those jobs were combat arms and warfighters. What people do not see is the Army Corps of Engineers and federal contractors who are there in massive numbers, helping to improve infrastructure. No one pays attention to the civil affairs units that are there helping with educational programs. They do not see the medical aid or the joint operations between the host nation military, law enforcement, and their federal government. And it is not glorious to make movies or media about these things. Back during the global war on terrorism, terrorist organizations like Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Houthis operated independently. Today, Al-Qaeda has rallied many of them to a common cause. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. It is highly suspected they even selected 7th of October for Hamas's invasion of Israel, because it was the date President Bush launched Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. These groups now coordinate collectively under Al-Qaeda, funded by Iran, an ally of Russia and China. Cartels and Border Operations, 2018. In 2018, I supported Operation Faithful Patriot. where the Army Corps of Engineers installed triple-strand razor wire atop the wall from California to Texas. Border Patrol briefings confirmed that our mission reduced illegal crossings and drug smuggling in areas where we were present. At every entry point, I saw pallets of methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, and other drugs seized and hauled into evidence rooms. Briefings on cartel activity were eye-opening. Mexico's homicide crisis. Since 2018, Mexico has recorded roughly 30,000 or more homicide victims each year, one of the highest rates globally. 2015 to 2024. Estimates from national and international trackers indicate well over 300,000 homicides total, though exact counts vary by dataset and method. Cartel-related murders rose from about 8,000 in 2015 to over 20,000 by 2022. Cartel conflict homicides, selected years. 2019, 35,588. 2020, 34,512. 2021, 35,625. 2022, 32,223. 2023, 32,252. 2024, 33,241. If you want an unflinching look at cartel violence, the films Sicario 1 and 2 are worth watching. Border security statistics 2021 to 2023, 1.5 million gotaways, illegal crossings without apprehension, compared to 500,000 in the previous administration. Since 2021, 382 individuals on the terror watch list were caught crossing. Estimates suggest over 2,000 may have entered undetected. Worth noting, while everyone focuses on active shooter threats, directives to terrorist organizations are to participate in any form of available means of mass murder. Hence the active drivers, for example. Socialism and the border. The socialists of our country believe in a left-leaning government to provide the people with something it has always promised and romanticized about, but never delivered on, and that is definitional socialism. In order for socialism to be ushered in, the greedy capitalist leftist democratic politicians have to be the ones providing it, along with the thousands of so-called socialist wealthy liberals in power on the left side of our government. These people are promising to break everything up and make it even. The government is suddenly going to have all the resources it needs to spread everything out so that everybody has and nobody needs, despite trillions of dollars in nearly unsolvable debt. While waving a magic wand over this financial impossibility, they also plan to swing the borders wide open, inviting millions of additional impoverished mouths to feed. 1.5 million or more every 4 years to be more precise, also while somehow keeping the economy from completely collapsing. We need to ask ourselves, how would that even be realistically feasible? The warning. When you look at just 3 issues discussed in this narrative alone, terrorism, cartel-driven organized crime, and mass migration, these concerns by themselves could nearly overnight transform a country that people run to, a constitutional republic of the people, by the people, into the very nations that people are fleeing from. How do you think countries like Iraq, Syria, Palestine, and the Gaza Strip, Mexico, and Colombia became the terrorist and cartel-ruled nations they are today? Iraq collapsed after decades of dictatorship, sectarian strife, and extremist infiltration. Syria imploded when civil war opened the door for ISIS and foreign-backed militias to carve it apart. Gaza fell under Hamas, a terrorist group that rules by fear and corruption instead of freedom. Mexico was consumed by cartels after years of weak law enforcement and government officials bought off or murdered into silence. Colombia endured decades of narco-terrorism as cartels like Medellin and Cali used money and violence to overpower the state. These nations did not choose peace, order, and accountability. They collapsed from within when corruption, extremism, and criminal organizations overwhelmed weak or complicit governments. If we collapse economically and turn into a terrorist-ridden state where everyone is poor together, how then are we the country that protects and has the strength to provide a safe haven? On ICE and enforcement. In regard to ICE turning our country into an apparent war zone, first off, no one is being killed who is not taking up arms against armed agents. Real fascist dictators in the past had no problem rounding up the targeted demographic and simply murdering them. That is not and will not happen. They are simply being deported for entering the country by unauthorized means and attempting to abuse and exploit the generosity of the United States. Second, the previous administration knew they were leaving any Republican president who actually cares about country over globalization with an impossible economic situation. While no soldiers are dying, we are at war with being overrun. Drastic measures had to be taken because Democratic politicians have been eroding the rule of law for the past decade plus. Consider everything I have said previously. In that instance, 1.5 million migrants entered illegally. The country is not able to economically receive them. That number is well beyond what our economic statistics say can be absorbed in any given year to maintain balance. Only so many immigrants are allowed per year, so that it does not tip the economics of the nation. There is adult math being applied when attempting to maintain a nation that houses 350 million people. Consider what would happen if every 4 years, 1.5 million people or more poured into the country. Cartels could operate with absolute impunity, and terrorist sleeper agents would continue to pour into the country by the thousands. I believe part of the issue is that a generation, driven by addiction to buy now, pay later, and instant gratification rather than proper budgeting, also cannot grasp the way economics are maintained on a global scale. All of our issues, and there are many, are intertwined when it comes to our radicalized youth. The final point: we must have borders, and we must have a vetting process. That is not to say we do not want people to migrate into our country, nor that this is not a country of immigrants, but it has to be done the right way. We have to defend our borders so that we remain a constitutional republic and a free market capitalist country, where everyone has the opportunity to succeed through hard work, without the fear of being hung from a bridge by your ankles, naked, headless, and mutilated next to your family, or living under the threat of car bombs detonating on our streets. That grim reality can happen when criminals and terrorists outnumber what our FBI and intelligence agencies have the manpower to monitor. Borders are not walls of oppression, they are lines of survival. Without them, we are not a nation, but an open target for cartels, terrorists, and corrupt ideologies that have already destroyed countless countries. History proves that when governments abandon sovereignty, criminals and extremists fill the void, and free people quickly become enslaved by violence, fear, and poverty. To remain the last great constitutional republic on earth, America must defend its borders, enforce a strict vetting process, and preserve the free market system that allows hard work, not terror, socialism, or corruption, to determine destiny. Our borders are the shield that keeps freedom alive. Additionally, when you factor in the increasing gang violence and murders in major cities like Chicago, you realize that there is a hostile takeover of the country by organized crime and terrorist groups on all sides. We are becoming radically close to living in terror every time we step outside our front door. Somehow, naive, safe space Americans, with delusions of implementing a socialist utopia in a world where survival of the fittest still exists, and always will within our species, are too blind to see the train until it is right in front of their faces. Despite popular belief about what the government's intelligence apparatus is actually capable of, if it becomes overextended, this country can quickly turn into a terrifying place for everyone to live, when there is a total breakdown of the rule of law.
The liberal mind conceives of itself as being good because it's liberal. The Western liberal tells him or herself, I'm a good person because I'm liberal, and I'm liberal because I'm a good person, which means that I believe in things like the brotherhood of man, conscience and compassion, looking after the wretched of the world, the poor, the wretched of the world, standing up against abuses of power. These are all good things, and that's why I'm a liberal. And I'm a liberal because of all these good things. So, one of the expressions of my goodness and my liberalism is that I support the Palestinian Arabs, who I think are an oppressed people, and they are oppressed by the Israelis, who have taken their land away from them, and they are oppressing them. Now, every part of that, in my view, is a lie. But put that to one side. This is what the liberal progressive thinks. And the liberal progressive thinks that supporting the Palestinians is therefore something that makes the liberal progressive a good person. October 7 happened. And suddenly you have a situation in which the people that the liberal progressive has supported as being oppressed, and everything they do is a legitimate defense or resistance against oppression, suddenly we can see that those people have turned into the most bloodthirsty savages that could ever be imagined. Not just people who kill, but who slaughter in a sadistic, barbaric, debauched and depraved fashion that people can't imagine ever happening. They have slaughtered, raped, beheaded, tortured, burned alive babies, children, women, elderly men and others, and in which the people that they have supported as being oppressed are good people because they're victims are these savages. And the people they have represented as oppressors are the victims. They can't have that. Because if they have that, if they admit that that is the case, then their entire worldview is shattered, because the people, you know, the cause they have supported as representing goodness is shown to be evil. And what does that make them? It makes them evil. So they can't have it. So what do? They go to extraordinary lengths to pretend that black is white, that justice is injustice, that oppression is resistance, and vice versa. So they have to represent the Israelis as being at fault. The Israelis are to blame for what's happened. So there is no better way of blaming people than accusing them of the very thing they are the victim of.
Projection.
So you accuse them of genocide. We hear it also regularly. The Israelis are accused of being Nazis. It's the same thing. It's not simply an offensive thing. It's a very deliberate thing, because if the Israelis are Nazis, then we are free. We, the liberal West, are free of any kind of guilt or any kind of association with bad things, because they are to blame. They are the people who are bad. And so we are free to continue with our fantasies of us being good people. And I think that's also what lay behind these amazing scenes that we saw on social media of people with their hands tearing down the posters of the hostages. Now you have to ask yourself, what's going through the mind of someone like that? These weren't posters advertising Israel. They weren't advertising the Israeli Defense Forces. They were pictures of babies, of children, of women who had been kidnapped by bloodthirsty monsters, by savage, depraved savages, and were being almost certainly subjected to untold horrors. And yet they were torn down, and the faces of the people tearing them down were contorted very often with rage and hate. And you have to ask yourself, what's going on in the mind of that person? And it seemed to me that they had to literally with their fingernails tear it out of sight. It was something that could not be tolerated to be in existence at all. The very concept of the Israeli babies and children as victims of the people they had been supporting, because it contradicted the narrative on which they had hung their own moral worth. And it seemed to me also they were tearing the Jews out, trying to tear the Jewish people completely out of their world, out of their sight, out of their world, out of their minds, out of their thoughts, and out of their consciences. That's to me what it represented. And this whole inversion of genocide thing is part of that. It is not just disgusting. It is not just ridiculous. It's evil. And I think it is a symptom of the evil paths into which the West has fallen through its embrace of a whole range of ideologies, a whole range of thinking, which I think has come to define what we call the liberal progressive West.